Good afternoon, residents of Everett, Washington. I'd like to call to order the Everett City Council meeting of August 24, 2022, and welcome everyone to the City Council chambers. The City Council is conducting our weekly council meeting hybrid. This will allow us to reach members of our community who wish to participate via Zoom or those who wish to attend in person in the chambers this afternoon. It is our hope to continue this format to be accessible as possible to our community. For those who wish to participate in a future via Zoom, you may find the public comment registration form on the City of Everett website under the City Council Department. Once you go to register here to provide comment via Zoom, you will need to fill out the form completely if you wish to provide public comment at a future meeting. After the public comment form is submitted, you'll receive an email confirmation with the Zoom link and the phone number to call to the meeting. Participants must submit this form at least 30 minutes prior to the meeting. Forms submitted after that time will not receive the Zoom link number, but can speak, but may still participate the day of the meeting by coming in person to the council chambers right up to before the meeting begins. Please note that we do not accept comments on any kind of campaigning, whether for or against ballot measures or candidates running for office. We also do not accept comments focused on personal matters that are unrelated to city business. With that, clerk, will you please take the roll?
Mayor Franklin.
Excused.
Councilmember Fossey.
Here.
Councilmember Zerlingo.
Here.
Councilmember Vogely.
Here.
Councilmember Schwab.
Here.
President Stonecipher.
Excused.
Councilmember Ryan.
Here.
Vice President Tui.
Here. I'd like to ask Councilmember Schwab to lead the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you for that. I would like to ask Councilmember Ryan to read the land acknowledgement.
Sure. The City Council wishes to acknowledge the original inhabitants of this place, the Shahobsh people and their successors, the Tulalip tribes. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, gathered on, and taken care of these lands and waters. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. We will strive to be honest about our past mistakes and bring about a future that includes their people, stories, and voices to form a more just and equitable society.
All right, thank you very much. Do I have a motion for the approval of minutes of August 17, 2022?
Councilmember Ryan so moves.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Great. We have a first and a second. Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilmember Fossey.
Yes.
Councilmember Zerlingo.
Yes.
Councilmember Vogely.
Yes.
Councilmember Schwab.
Abstain.
Councilmember Ryan.
Yes.
Vice President Tui.
Yes. Angie, do we have anyone signed up today to speak this afternoon?
Good afternoon, Vice President Tui. We do not have written comments, but I do have one person signed up to speak here.
Okay.
So if Barbara would like to approach the podium.
All right. Thank you.
And just a reminder, you have 3 minutes to speak, and at 30 seconds, I'll invite you.
Oh, that little thing just lit up automatically. Okay, this is a little daunting. So I hope this isn't going to seem like a personal issue, which you had mentioned, but I'm here to talk about parking enforcement and how I'm concerned about how long it seems to get some things done, and I have been advised by someone, and I don't know if this is true, that there is only one parking enforcement officer for the area from 41st South, whereas there are multiple parking enforcement officers from 41st North. So an example in my own neighborhood, and one of my neighbors came to talk to you recently because of the increase in traffic and the crazy sidewalks and all the cars parked on Katy Road where we live. And it's where the new pallet house is going to go in by Faith Lutheran Church. Thank you very much. So I'm concerned too because there are cars parked everywhere. And to give you an example, there are 2 cars parked by my house, both with expired plates. I've contacted parking enforcement multiple times for one. I know the code like the back of my hand now, that it has to be moved every 72 hours and it has to cross an intersection, and neither of these cars ever do that. sometime, after it was red tagged last week on Tuesday, the guy just literally came up, flipped the car around so it's facing a different direction, and now it's blocking the mailboxes. So I contacted parking enforcement again, and they said, well, it doesn't mean that we're going to actually come out there right away within that 72-hour time frame. And I do understand that, but I just feel like it takes a long time to get these things taken care of. And what the people in the condominiums on my street do is they just play musical cars every night. So they take the ones off the street sometimes that don't have valid plates, and then they move other cars up onto the street, sometimes parking partly on neighbors' lawns. So Katy Road is basically full of pedestrian traffic, especially from September to June, because there's families walking their kids to school at Madison Elementary. There's middle school and high school kids walking down to get on the bus on Peck's Drive. So I'm very concerned about how long it takes for some of those things to get taken care of. So can anybody tell me whether the answer to that question, is there just one parking enforcement officer from 41st South and multiple people?
I think Chief Templeman will maybe chat with you
Okay.
after, when you're done speaking,
Okay.
and clarify things for you.
Okay, so that makes, because, you know, in addition to that, I guess I just feel like there needs to be a revision to the parking rules, because it's like whack-a-mole in every neighborhood, every 72 hours. You all know what I'm talking about. A giant RV that was parked one place just moves across the intersection to another place. Time's up? Yeah. So, anyway, sorry. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you for coming, and like I said, Chief Templeman will speak with you outside there.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, where did I leave off here? Okay, thank you. Moving on to council comments and liaison reports. We'll start with Councilmember Fosse.
Thank you. And perhaps in our presentation later, the chief can give us any pertinent update on parking stuff or rules that, now? Sorry.
I would enjoy having an answer in public at this time, if that is okay with Vice President.
That's fine.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Vice President, TUI council members. Dan Templeman with the Police Department. In response to the question, yes, we have one parking enforcement officer assigned south of 41st. We have 5 north. Obviously, the north is a little bit different geography and enforcement areas than we have out south. We've got obviously all the timed parking in the north end. We've got the hospital. We've got the college. And so it requires more resources to enforce in those areas. And when we start moving those resources out, then we start receiving complaints in the downtown core for lack of enforcement. So, but what I can say is that we have temporarily, just in the last week or so, assigned another officer out south to help with some of the backlog, because we started to review what the backlogs were in complaints. And so we are in the process of catching up with some of these complaints that have become a little bit stale. And then we are also just starting background investigation on another parking enforcement officer that will get us up to 7, and we're considering how we're going to deploy that additional parking enforcement officer. It may be one that does get assigned out south, but we're still evaluating that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anything else, Councilmember Fosse?
Yes, I actually just came from a raising awareness event that was nurses sharing patient stories, and that was pretty impactful. And luckily, I made it over here to council on time, but that was I appreciated a lot of the nurses sharing their stories at that event this morning. I also, I believe it was yesterday, or the Weyerhaeuser Muse restoration kickoff. That was at the port, and that's pretty exciting, the development that's coming there. So I'm excited to see where that goes, and when eventually they actually have it running to to definitely go over there and enjoy some coffee at their new coffee bar. So the other thing was I got to attend the Aqua Sox game last week. Councilmember Ryan and I were there. We got to throw the pitch, which was pretty exciting at their Solidarity Night. We had a lot of fun, and I guess the only update for this pending weekend is that George Jetson is expected to be born on Saturday, so everybody can look forward to that. And that's the end of my comments for today.
Okay, Councilmember Zarlingo.
Just a brief comment. I attended an Aqua Sox game with my family last night, myself. A wonderful experience, a real amenity for us. Got a chance to talk with the owner for a few minutes, and it's clear that they're doing baseball. Though this guy's an investments and venture capital person, they're doing baseball because they want to do baseball. And that is the coolest thing about all of this. I think that's a great benefit to Everett, because this is not to make money. This is so that they can have baseball here, and I'm looking forward to doing all we can to keep that way. Thanks.
All right, Councilmember Vogely.
I also got to talk with Aqua Sox people, but and it was good, and I do enjoy having the Aqua Sox here. And last night I got to speak with the 350 Everett group about our climate action plan, and there's more questions, and Kimberly Klein is working on a comprehensive view for everybody, so we'll get that in early 2023, but just wanted to put that out there. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Schwab.
Yes, I just wanted to make a quick comment about our budget committee. And some good news is that our sales tax revenue, specifically from new construction, is increased and holding steady. There is some tougher news, though. Our budget deficit, our structural deficit is still in place. And it seems that the current pattern is to use funding from unfilled employment positions to fill the budget. So things are still really tough. So we're going to have a lot of heavy lifting to do here in the next couple of years. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And Councilmember Ryan.
Good afternoon. Yeah, attending the Funko game last Thursday for Union Solidarity Night and throwing out a first pitch was definitely a bucket list item. So Councilmember Fossey had an amazing pitch, so she's got a good arm. Just wanted to make sure that goes on the record. I also attended the leaflet event today with UFCW 3000 supporting our nurses at Providence, and folks joined from, I talked to one person that drove up from Tacoma to support the event, so I'm just really proud to continue efforts to make sure that our nurses are taken care of and that our healthcare system, the troubles that it's experiencing, are addressed. I attended a tour of the 988 facility last Thursday, and VOA Western Washington is just doing a tremendous job of getting that off the ground. And I'm really, Washington State's one of four state legislatures in the nation that have dedicated funding to support 988. So folks are experiencing, 988 is replacing the National Suicide Hotline. So if you're experiencing behavioral health issues or mental health issues or need support in any way, don't hesitate to call or text or online message to 988, and there's a whole team of folks that are there to support you. Attended this last weekend was so exciting. I'm not even going to list all the fun stuff I got to do, but so I'm just really excited about the events that happen in Everett and down on the waterfront. And coming up this weekend at the waterfront at the port is the Wheels on the Waterfront event on Saturday. So go ahead and check that out, especially while we still have nice weather. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I have no other update this afternoon. Do we have an administrative update?
No administrative update today.
Okay, thank you. And City Attorney, Mr. Hall.
There's no report from legal. We are requesting a 20-minute executive session to discuss a litigation matter pursuant to RCW 423110-1I with no action to follow.
All right, thank you. Okay, moving on, do I have a motion for the 3 consent items?
Vogely so moves the 3 consent items.
Okay,
Seconded.
thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilmember Fossey?
Yes.
Councilmember Zarlingo?
Yes.
Councilmember Vogely?
Yes.
Councilmember Schwab?
Yes.
Councilmember Ryan?
Yes.
Vice President Tui?
Yes. And we have 5 proposed action items, and we have our Planning Director, York Stevens Waja, here to provide an update based on the questions received on items 4 and 5. And after his update, then we'll see if there's any other further questions from council. York, welcome back.
Thank you, Vice President Tui. Good day, Council. Not sure which side of noon we're at here. Just wanted to provide a quick update. There were some questions that came up at the August 10th briefing, and then I think a few more at last week's council meeting. So we've done some research and wanted to provide some answers to those so we can smooth the path towards our planned public hearing on the 2 ordinances, the one that is revising the regulations for homeless shelters, indoor and outdoor, and emergency housing and temporary extreme weather shelters. That's the one that's up top on the agenda under the proposed action. I don't remember that there were questions on the max residence one, but if there was on someone's mind, please correct me and I'll make sure to go through the whole record before next week to see if I did miss anything on that. And of course, if there are any more questions that come up today. So a couple of the questions that I remember from the 10th included, Councilmember Vogel had a question about the types of warrants that would warrant a immediate notification to the Everett Police Department. And this is in the managing agency responsibilities. There is a provision that says that the managing agency shall immediately contact police if someone is rejected or ejected where the reason for the rejection or ejection is an active warrant or a match on a sex offender check or a potential threat. I'm working with Deputy Chief Irving on that. We'll have finish that conversation, I think, early next week, so we'll get a thorough answer on what police department's position is on what the appropriate. We want to balance, obviously, making it easy for folks to access the services while maintaining the safety in the facility and in the community. You brought up the difference between arrest warrants and bench warrants, and I think it's a good question. And so we may propose some modified language based on that conversation and bring that back to you for the 31st. The next one was a suggestion or a question about notifying the city of when an temporary extreme weather shelter is proposed to open. And this was in response to the fact that we have in residential zones, it is an administrative conditional use permit that would have city process and a requirement for a permit, but in most of our commercial zones, you would be able to open this up as a permitted use with potentially limited oversight by the city. That seemed like a good point, and so we're preparing a revised ordinance with just a couple of cleanup things, and that's one of those where we're gonna propose adding a provision that would require notification of the city fire marshal. Seemed like the right point of contact for this 48 hours before opening the facility. So that would give us the opportunity to coordinate with the provider of that. There was a question about criteria for administrative conditional use permit, and several of these shelter facilities would be an administrative conditional use permit where they currently go to the hearing examiner as a conditional use permit. The process I laid out as an administrative decision by the planning director and with an appeal route to the hearing examiner if someone feels like that decision was made in error. The criteria for evaluating whether that the proposed facility would be appropriate and what conditions we might want to put on it are 3. 1, compatibility of proposed structures and improvements with surrounding properties, including size, height, location, setback, and arrangements of all proposed buildings and facilities, especially as they relate to light and shadow impacts on more sensitive land uses and less intensive zones. 2, the landscaping, buffering, and screening of buildings, parking, loading, and storage areas, especially as they relate to more sensitive land uses. And 3, the generation of nuisance irritants such as noise, smoke, dust, odor, glare, visual blight, or other undesirable impacts. So with these and any other administrative conditional use permit, staff would receive the application, we would measure it against those criteria and establish conditions or reject the proposal as appropriate. We had a request for supporting maps. That's a good one, and I was glad that Becky ran through the kind of a description of what those zones are. I work with those every day, so it's a good reminder that what is thoroughly in my head is not in everyone's head. So I'm glad that she did that. We'll expand on that with some maps that can illustrate where some of these facilities are allowed and not. And then a question came up on 24-hour staffing. There is an existing piece of code that relates only to outdoor shelters, pallet shelters, tents, safe parking areas, and it reads, "The managing agency shall appoint a member to serve as a point of contact for the Everett Police Department. At least one member shall be on duty at all times. The names of on-duty members shall be posted daily." When we put together this ordinance, we brought some of the requirements for outdoor shelters in for the indoor shelters, the one that seemed to make sense. That is one of those that we brought in. There was also a question as to whether this would be applicable to existing facilities and not just new ones. I do think this sort of a requirement would be applicable to existing facilities. I think that's one that we may also propose a little bit of revised language to back up a little bit on that. And what I have written down now is that rather than appointing a member, and I'm not sure what a member of a managing agency is, so we want to make sure that we can implement this, that the managing agency shall identify a point of contact that is available at all times. We have a proposal for a facility where they were proposing to use remote monitoring to make sure that the facility is running well. Sometimes these are small ones and it doesn't make sense to have 24-hour staffing. These performance standards are modifiable with an application, but still it seemed like maybe a little bit lower of a standard for the default made sense. Would definitely welcome any comments, suggestions, or different direction on that, as ultimately that would be your policy choice. Those were the questions that I remember. If I forgot any or missed any, please remind me, and then again, I'll go through the record, and then happy to take any new ones today. So you can expect otherwise a revised ordinance and an errata sheet that describes specifically what all of the changes are, whether small or large, what the rationale was to accompany that, and that will be in the packet for the August 31st public hearing. I think it'll be ready like tomorrow, today.
Okay, great, thank you. So we'll just go down the line and see if anybody has any further questions. Councilmember Fosse, do you have any further questions?
I appreciate the explanation and the lower default standard. At previous employment I had where we had to have a 24-hour contact, we just simply had a cell phone that we would switch on shifts. So we would always have the same contact, and that was very, very easy. But there was the same number the whole time, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Zarlingo, do you have any further questions?
Yeah, I have been going through this document. There's a lot of legal structure to it and a lot of planning structure to it. The intersection of those has complexity that I've been working on, trying to understand in particular some of the implications here. And there's kind of a two-pronged thing, though there is some nexus there. In response to the Department of Commerce comments, one of the responses was the city moved in 2020, and they give an ordinance, to consider these uses, this is the temporary and supportive housing, as residential, like any other residential development allowed in a particular zone. A footnote to the use matrix indicates that social services component is allowed as an accessory use to permanent supportive housing, and transitional housing only is shown in all zones where social services are not otherwise permitted. Staff will continue to clearly communicate to applicants and the public that these uses are broadly allowed in the city as dwellings plus social services. So this is kind of where we get to implications and things I'm trying to understand. In as much as we're talking about residential uses and considering them that way, there's also in Exhibit 2, page 6 of 7, I guess it's a footnote with a superscript 6, tiny text, so let me get this right here. Social services permitted as an accessory use in permanent supportive housing facilities, transitional housing facilities, and shelters hosted by religious organizations pursuant to RCW, etc. Services provided on site shall be limited to residents of the shelter or housing. And so that circles me back to, if we're talking about these as essentially residential uses, then I think the services provided, whether this is at a religiously supervised or operated site or not, those services provided should be provided to residents. Otherwise, my concern is that we are backhandedly, accidentally establishing a social services use, a business, a social services provision in a residential area if it's essentially non-residents. So, I mean, my sense of this is we should be direct with the public about what we're doing. If it's meant to be as residential, then the scale, whether it's small group home all the way up to things like the proposed purchase of the Days Inn, if that's residential, services should be on-site to residents, not creating an accidental service center that would be incompatible or a burden on adjacent users. And I don't know if there's a direct response from you on this or not. I'm crystallizing this myself a little bit because it's taken me a while to go through it and see these implications, at least that one so far. Feel free if you have any response or suggestion, but I guess for me, I have a clear policy intent in that.
So if I understand this, this is really, and you said reference note 8 in exhibit.
6, I think it was, in Exhibit 2, page 6 of 7.
Okay, let me read that real quick to make sure.
Page 111.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I'll follow up with the exact language because I'm going to get myself confused with the exhibits here. But the social services is one that is currently allowed. It's in our use matrix under offices, clinics, social or human service facility, and community services. Those are allowed as a permitted use in most of the business zones, an administrative use in the UR4, so the more dense residential zone, and then prohibited in all of the lower density residential zones, RS, R1, R2. The proposed ordinance that we have would add social services as a permitted use only as accessory to a permanent supportive housing facility in those lower density residential zones. So where they are currently not allowed, we would allow them, but be limited to the residents on site. And the intent is to allow permanent supportive housing, but not standalone social service facilities. Social services can include, I think, hot meal preparation, mental health, counseling, those sorts of human services. Depending on your definition of residential zone, I don't think we're changing the structure, proposing to change the structure for like the UR4 zone or the mixed urban zone, which is adjacent to residential, and some people may consider it their neighborhood. The mixed urban zone is the one that the hotel is in. So by limiting the potential for social service facilities in those zones and limiting them to residents of a facility on site and prohibiting standalone, it might be a change from where we are at now. I will do a little bit more research on that to clarify, because we've got both the comparison of where we're at now to where we're proposing to go, and there's some changes in definitions and everything. So I will try to put together a quick response for you to consider.
Okay, because the thing that I'm seeing is that if we are calling these residential uses, but it's in that mixed urban zone or a business zone, then we've blended the two things together, and we create something that wasn't there before, accidentally. And that's my point. If we're making that a residential zone, then some of the uses of some of the restrictions on residential ought to apply. If they're not going to apply, then at least my inclination would be to be explicit about those services being provided to residents only, lest we connect two things and create something we did not intend. All right, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay. Councilmember Vogely.
Yes, thank you. I am reading this, and it's an underlined, which means the same thing that council member, I've just forgotten your name, Zarlingo, was talking about. I mean, since it's underlined in teeny little 6, services provided on site shall be limited to residents of the shelter or housing. So no matter where it is, it sounds like it's exactly what you want. But maybe not, and.
Yeah, this one is, it may be restricted, it may be limited to the ones by churches, but I'm not sure.
So anyways, yep, there's that. But my actual questions were, when you were giving us the answers to previous questions and notifying the city, I didn't quite understand. Do we notify the fire marshal? Or is the notification coming through the fire marshal to every resident? Can you re-explain?
The proposal, the language that we will be proposing in a revised ordinance would have notification by the managing agency to the fire marshal. Then we would have some administrative procedures to spread the word from the fire marshal throughout the city
Okay.
government, but it wouldn't be intended as notification to the broader community.
Okay, thank you. And then the next one that you were explaining about allowing structures with compatibility of the structure, landscaping, and nuisance. You used a term, and now I can't remember what it was because I didn't write it down quick enough, but it was making sure that it's compatible next to some.
More sensitive land use?
Yes.
Yeah.
What is a more sensitive
I think-
land use?
Yeah, I don't know that that is defined.
You know.
If I were to.
My garden,
if
it
I-
is being shadowed.
If I would apply, I mean, generally, a residential use is more sensitive than a commercial use, commercial more sensitive than industrial, so I would apply it on that sort of a spectrum.
So maybe that just needs to be focused in, or more of a, I don't know.
Yeah,
That's-
it's existing language, so, I'll take a look and make sure that it would be clear how we would apply that, but.
You know, because if it's wetlands, I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
right? But somebody's preference is different.
Yeah, I think the idea is that if you're being loud next to the Boeing factory, that's not a big deal. If you're being loud next to my house with the windows open because it's hot, that's a big deal.
True, thank you. Oh, and then I think I asked the question, and I don't think I got an answer, because maybe it wasn't a great enough question. Religious organizations, do we have to limit the managing agency or people that own the land to religious organizations, or can it be just businesses, nonprofits, et cetera?
Yes, you're right. I forgot that one. As soon as I went through my list, I remembered that there was one more. That would be a policy choice by the council. So right now, shelters are not permitted in those lower density residential zones. By state law, you have to allow shelters on property owned or controlled by religious facilities, and so that reference note reflects that.
Okay.
We were not proposing to change the existing prohibition otherwise. That is something that the council could do as a policy choice.
Okay.
I think that maybe could need to go back to the planning commission, as that would be a significant change. I will work with legal on that aspect.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's all I have right now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to Councilmember Schwab.
Yes, thank you. I want to go back to what Councilmember Zarlingo was talking about. I know we have 3 specific projects in our community of Everett here that I wanted to address. One is, of course, the hotel there in the South Everett area, and then there are 2 women and children's centers, both in the, I guess you called it an outdoor structures, the pallet? Is that how they're zoned?
Outdoor, yeah.
Okay.
The pallets are outdoor emergency shelter.
So we have 2 sites. So 3 total is what I'm referring to, the 2 pallet shelter sites, and then I know they're all zoned differently.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that complicates the matter. And I'd really like to see this language here on page 111 applying to those 3 projects, and maybe others that are alike. And I think it's really important for the community and the businesses around to know that, that the services need to be adequate for that facility. But unless there is a proposed social services provider for everyone, open to the, whatever the grouping that they appeal to, I suppose, that be a separate permitting process. and that the social services on site should be specifically to the residents of those occupancies. That's my request. I know that's a big lift.
Yeah. Some of that is, so yeah, I think we would have to go zone by zone on this. I'm starting to figure this out, and where some of the confusion was is that reference note 6, I hate to say is there in error, and so in this revised ordinance, that reference note 6 should just say reserved. The same language though, and this is because we moved social services out of Exhibit 3 to Exhibit 4. There's different use matrices. There's one for residential, commercial, and quasi-public. Social services had been in commercial because it was tied to offices for some reason. That didn't seem like the right place, and so we're moving it out of commercial and into the quasi-public use matrix. That shift is what created that issue with the footnote, so I'll clarify that in the errata sheet. But the same language is in the correct, it's reference note 8 in Exhibit 3. That applies to UR3 and below, so all of the lower density residential zones where there is a restriction that it can only be an accessory use. And that's because the social services were not currently allowed in those zones. The other ones, in the UR4 zone, for instance, it's an administrative conditional use permit, so using those criteria, if it didn't make sense to have a social service facility that was broadly available to the general public in that site, in that zone, then we would have the administrative ability to say no or to condition it. And that's existing, and that would be proposed to be the same in the neighborhood business, and mixed urban zones, except on the ground floor in the mixed urban zone on a TOD or a pedestrian street. So that's much of downtown Everett. You can't have a standalone social service facility on the ground floor. Outside of those restricted areas, you would be able to open a social service facility that was broadly available to the whole public, whether in conjunction with a residential facility or not. We could pull back on that. That would be a council decision, but it's an existing arrangement. So the reason for tying that only to residents of of the facility is because we had expanded those permanent supportive housing into the lower density residential zones.
So, so out of those 3 sites, then only one of them would be excluded from having an open social services provider?
If they're associated with shelters, there's a management plan, and I would think that the management plan would have to describe the population to be served. And with an administrative conditional use permit process for the shelters, we would have the ability to say no, that we should restrict this and on a site-by-site and case-by-case basis. But it would be up to me.
Okay, well, according to that answer, then that would
The
take care
department,
of 2 of the locations that I was referencing to. So in question would be the site, the hotel out near the Everett Mall then.
Right, yep, that's a mixed urban zone. I don't believe it's planned to be part of the management plan, but in that case, if the county or the managing agency came in with their administrative conditional use permit, said we also want to make this a triage facility for all of South Everett, you come in and then we'll direct you to the appropriate facility. I guess we would have to measure it against those criteria and see what the impact would be and negotiate it with them.
Thank you very much.
Anything else? Councilmember Schwab? Okay. Councilmember Ryan?
Thanks. Thank you. Hi, York. I was just curious if under the definition of social services, if assisted living or elder care falls under that category as well?
I don't think so, to the extent that those are state licensed extended care facilities. Those are addressed separately. If it's more just like residential, then it's residential. Social services could be counseling, therapy, and all the other human services for an elder population, but just be a residential facility, no, it would not.
Okay, thanks. And then also to clarify, for the 24/7 site management, it won't be required to have somebody on site, but just somebody available, is that correct?
That would be the standard that we would start from. That is modifiable, so a proposal could come in saying we don't need anybody available ever. And I guess we'd probably say no to that, but I mean, it could be, again, sort of a negotiation. And if it was a high risk or very, either vulnerable populations involved or a high risk situation, then that's where the conditions, discretionary conditions could be placed to say, in this case, you need 3 people on site at all times.
Okay.
And when I was, discomfort about saying my decision, this is obviously in coordination with police, community development, fire, the mayor's office, and all of that.
Great. Yeah, my only concern would be if a person is remote and it was a facility where there needed to be somebody on site, are they remote in California or are they remote in Linwood or something? So just making sure that if there is a on-site response that needs to happen, that they're within a reasonable distance for responding to whatever might come up. Sorry. Thanks.
Thank you for those great questions. I just have a couple of things. I know I brought it up last time about council notification, and I know that not all these projects require neighborhood notification, but certainly if the neighborhoods need to be notified, if council can be also in that loop. And same with social services at one of these projects that will be at large, covering more. It would be great for council members to also be in the loop for that, so that we're aware of things that are falling in that
Certainly.
area. All right.
And I didn't mention that, but that was a just go do,
Okay.
and we will do so.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Any other questions? One last chance? All right, thank you so much, York, appreciate it. It's a lot of stuff, so appreciate your patience with all of our questions. Now moving on to council briefing agenda. This item comes before the city council serving as a council committee of the whole and are likely to be scheduled at a future meeting. This afternoon, we have the Everett Police Department study update, and Chief Templeman, welcome, and he will introduce the presenter from Matrix Consulting Group to provide the update today.
Great. Thank you very much, and good afternoon again, council members. Dan Templeman with the Police Department. Before I introduce the presenter, I just wanted to give a real quick recap of how we got to where we're at today. And this is the assessment that's been ongoing since October of last year. The assessment is really looking at 5 primary areas within our organization. These areas were identified in the RFP, in which then Council Member Murphy, who was the liaison to the Public Safety Committee, and Council President Stonecipher were involved in. And those 5 areas, and I'm just going to look at them here again so I get them right: operational and management analysis, staffing analysis, patrol schedules and deployment, community policing, and a review of our overtime practices. These were all the focus areas that were identified in the RFP that was awarded in September of last year to Matrix Consulting. As part of their work, they are required to brief council along the way 3 times. They briefed this council on April 13th of this year, and today is their second briefing to council, and their final briefing will be when they present the final report. So I believe, Angie, that we have Richard Brady, who is the president and founder of Matrix, who's also our project manager, and he may have a colleague with him as well, and they will be presenting today. So thank you very much.
Question for the chief?
Councilmember Schwab?
Yeah, Chief, I don't see facilities here on this scope. Is that something that we're looking at separately, or just, could you address that?
Yeah, I don't believe facilities was part of the scope of work as part of this assessment. As you know, there are all kinds of aspects of public safety and law enforcement that are concerns and issues for the community and for council, and we really had to kind of narrow the scope of this work. And these were like I say, the 5 focus areas that were identified by the council at that time as being areas that they wanted us to focus on. I think that there's obviously always ongoing analysis. I know we're looking at property room and different things within our police department right now as it relates to facilities. So maybe part of something down the road.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Angie.
Hi, Richard, you can go ahead and unmute and share your screen when you're ready.
Okay, hold Hold on, I had assumed you were sharing your screen, but I can take care of that in a second.
Sorry, Richard, could you hold for just a moment here? There's a little bit of sound issue. One moment. Okay, can you try talking now, Richard?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
Okay, we'll get started. Members of the council, thank you very much for the opportunity to meet with you again to discuss our progress in the study. Excuse me a second. Sorry about that. We've been working diligently since we last met with you. When we met the first time, it was mostly about the various things we were doing in a study that were in process. We've completed a number of steps in the study, certainly all the foundational elements, which we will quickly summarize here. And we have developed a management report, which we have reviewed with staff in the police department. And we are about to complete in draft version 4 review, first by the management team, this organization and staffing assessment. So that's imminent, and that'll be ready for our next presentation to you in coming weeks. So let me get started. Let me just remind you, since it's been a few months since the last time we briefed you about what the focus of this study has been. It's first and foremost a review of the staffing needs within the police department, but looking at alternative strategies to meet the needs. So look at alternative response and alternative ways of providing services that could be more responsive to the public, as well as potentially more efficient. Looking at departmental management systems. And when we say management systems, we mean general management things associated with labor relations, with internal communications and the like. But some management systems that are critical today as it relates to policies, to accountability, to leadership, first line supervision, and recruitment and hiring and training of police officers. During this process, we've incorporated the perspective of employees through many interviews, including on-site ride-alongs with patrol personnel and interviews with other staff on site, some virtually as well, and virtual meetings with the community. We've compared department practices, policies, et cetera, to other communities, comparably sized communities in the state of Washington. So that's what we have been asked to do. What we've done to date, as I mentioned, we've conducted extensive interviews of staff, including some time on site, augmented those interviews with an employee survey, which I'll summarize in a minute. We've collected much data, which you will gain an appreciation of once you see the next iteration of this process, the staffing assessment. But to this point, we summarized the factual information in terms of organizational structures, staffing, and vacancies and things like that, and importantly, roles and responsibilities of staff in a descriptive profile of the department. We have facilitated 5 community meetings to get their views, and some of those were general meetings, a couple of other with the Spanish speaking community. We've developed a survey of comparably sized agencies in the state. That was fairly limited to 5 communities in the state. As I said, we've analyzed and come up with a report on management systems, which
I'm
we'll
sorry,
summarize.
sir.
Yes.
I know that you can't really see us. I can't understand a bit. So,
We're working on it. Internet's going in and out, and so they are trying to get a hold on it, so.
Is it the same for everybody?
Yeah.
So I can't do anything
postpone.
I can try to put the speaker in the middle, but it's gonna, quality is gonna be the same.
Okay. Chief Templeman, are we on a timeline that's such that we could postpone this for a few weeks and get it on an upcoming agenda?
Yes, we certainly can postpone it. Yeah.
So I'd be happy to work with the chief and reschedule Richard. It may be a few weeks out, I believe, if I understand the scheduling, or perhaps not.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's got conflicts, but we can figure that out this afternoon and get a date reschedule.
Will it work? I mean,
Well,
why
actually, we'll have
reschedule?
him attend in person.
Oh,
present.
that would be fantastic.
I made that assumption. Did you make that assumption as well? So that may take a little bit longer.
I will make that assumption now myself.
Well, thank you, Richard, for that, and we will finish this update in the very near future, and we'll have that posted on our website. So with that.
Sorry for the difficulties.
Yeah. With that, we will now go into executive session, which is expected to last 20 minutes with no announcement or action to follow.
Council is on executive session. Audio Audio
Hello, this is Council Vice President Tui returning from executive session. The council is still there and will remain, needs 5 more minutes in executive session. Thank you. There we go. And with no further business, we are now adjourned.